Kokie kaga desu ka? Watanabe-dan desu. On today's episode of Backward Engineering Your Script, we're going to talk about some of the procedural issues of actually writing a script. And if you've been taking screenwriting classes, you know that one of the most important things that they teach you is to come up with your short outline and then follow that by a more detailed outline, maybe somewhere along the line doing a bunch of character bios, and then actually take that and start writing. And normally, with the first class that you take in any kind of a writing program, you're going to be writing probably the first 25, 30 pages of the script or a short. Now, I'm going to deal with the first 25 or 30 pages of the script because and this is just me going against some of the academic rigor of the past and say that's probably not the best way to actually teach someone who's writing for the first time. And the reason I'm going to say that is because writing is sort of like learning how to speak a foreign language. In much the same way, I would not expect someone who is learning how to write for the first time to be able to fully master the nuance that's necessary to write dialogue with subtext, or how to come up with a scene that alludes to a lot more than what you see directly on the page. No, a lot of that comes from a lot of practice, and that comes from writing a lot of different scripts. So since my goal is to actually get my students, and therefore you all, to finish something, that's going to be what we're working on now. We're going to talk about ways to make sure that you can actually finish the screenplay that you started. And perhaps the best way to do that is to look at writing as being something that's highly pleasurable. And in order to do something that's highly pleasurable, it doesn't cause the pain. It allows you to sit in front of the computer, which is actually the most difficult part of the writing process, and start writing. Now, number one thing that I recommend is that people force themselves, and I will use that word force, to write for 3 minutes a day. Yes, you heard that right. I said 3 minutes. You can always write more than that, but please write a minimum of 3 minutes a day, 6 days a week. And I'm very specific about what you can't include in that 3 minutes. The 3 minutes cannot include something like answering emails. It cannot include getting into a Twitter firestorm with your best frenemies. Nor can it include any kind of social media activity other than a blog. Now, if you're writing a blog or doing, let's say, a video channel like this, then yes, that definitely does count among the 3 minutes because you are doing something that is creative. You can also do a dream diary. You can also muse on the terrible things that happened to you over the past couple of weeks. Or rather than that, if you want to be positive and good about it, talk about the good things that happen. But it needs to be something that does not have a purpose other than creativity or other than wasting time, which is why I don't recommend emails and all of that. But I do recommend, if you want to write a movie review or something, that's great too. It's anything that gets that creative juice flowing. And from there, you can do a little bit more. The second thing I want to suggest doing is not look at the screenplay as a series of regimented steps that you must follow in a certain specific order. Write the short outline, then write, or write your log line, then write the short outline, then write your longer treatment, then start writing the pages. No, do whatever you feel like. If what you feel like is just sitting down and coming up with a variety of different scenes, do that. If what you feel like doing is just coming up with your main characters and figuring out unusual situations you can put them in that don't necessarily have to be part of the script, do that. In fact, that's one of my favorite things to do. One of my favorite assignments to give to people who are writing is to say, pretend that you are, that two of your characters get stuck in an elevator that gets caught between floors. How do they react to that situation? Do they panic? Do they handle it well? Just think about that. Or another thing to do is to go to a coffee shop or a restaurant and just listen to the people around you. Again, I know, oh, that's spying and all that. Well, guess what? Writing is spying. So get over it. And what we used to do when I was in school is a bunch of us used to hang out at coffee shops for all hours as we were working on our creative endeavors. And what we would do is we would talk about whatever conversation was going on around us, and try to imagine what those people looked like and how they were dressed, and how they were being. And, everyone else at the table could see them. But, we would start filling in their dialogue based on what we couldn't see. Now, okay, yeah, it is making fun of other people, but they don't know, or if they did know, they probably found it amusing, or realized they were talking too loud. But it was amazing how often completely wrong we were, but at the same time, how sometimes correct. And just trying to tell by the verbal cues of how somebody is talking, what they're talking about, and why they're talking about it, helps you develop as a writer. Now, my first boss was a gentleman by the name of Paul Manette, and he ended up winning the National Book Award for a book he wrote called Becoming a Man. In between times that he was writing books that won the National Book Award, he would write poetry. He was considered a major poet in the early days of the gay community. And he would also, in order to make enough money to keep his spoiled dog Puck in high caviar, so to speak, he would write novelizations of movies such as Predator and Nosferatu and Scarface as the novelizations, which was a style of promotion for movies that really don't exist anymore. And on top of that, he would be writing screenplays with his writing partner, Alfred Soule, who directed a movie called Alice, Sweet Alice. I hope you all see that at some point. It's a great low-budget movie and shows just how wild you can be when you don't have commercial constraints on top of you and you're writing genre. It's way ahead of its time, and it was very, very much a part of the American giallo tradition. But anyway, Alfred and Paul would constantly write scripts for which they would get options, but nothing was ever really made. And it didn't matter because they were making a nice salary off of it. But what I learned the most from Paul, and I think what's important for anyone who's a writer, especially if you want to write a lot of things, is to always write. And what Paul would do is he believed in writing what he wanted to write, not what he felt he had to. And yeah, if you're getting paid money to come up with a script, of course you're being paid to, but that doesn't mean you can't still try to assess the muse. And the way Paul would do that is he would write the ending of whatever script they were writing first. He would write the last scene as the first thing he would do. And then from there, he would write the scene that came before that. And from there, he would write the scene that came before that. And sooner or later, he would get to the point where he goes, okay, now I know what my story is and I know where I need to begin. And at that point, he would come up with his log line and come up with his short outline. Yes, I did say that. He would start writing his script without having any idea what he was actually writing. He would just have an image for an ending, and he would start it there. Now, is that really so rare? No! Look at Margaret Mitchell. When she was writing Gone with the Wind, she wrote the last scene first, and then she backed it out of that. And that's what so many writers do. They start with their ending, and once they get to know who their characters are and what their story is, then they can go back and attack the beginning. Further, now remember, this was in the analog days, so we didn't really have computer files and all that. I mean, I was writing their scripts for them on Microsoft Word on a very, very primitive DOS version of it. And one of the things that I loved what Paul would do is that he believed, even though he had the files on his computer, he needed visual representation of what he would write. So as he would write his scenes, and remember, he was writing them backwards, he would put where the scene was relative to the entire script on the floor in the right spot. And then whenever the muse would visit, he would write whatever scene he felt like writing that day and place it on the floor in roughly the position it would be in the completed script. Eventually, his floor would be covered with a lot of individual scenes. but there would still be huge gaps in it. And at a certain point, he would say, okay, now it's time to write the bullshit scenes. These are the scenes he didn't want to write. And then he would come up with a different way of making those scenes bearable. And we'll cover that in a separate video all by itself. But in that way, he would write the script exclusively by only writing the scenes that the muse told him he should write next. And he would often write 2 or 3 scripts at the same time. And as can we say, undisciplined as that might seem, he finished every one of them. He finished his books. He won awards. So obviously he was doing something right. So there is no correct way to actually write a script. And I'll tell you that even to this day, I have followed the methods that I learned from Paul. I'm not saying that my method here is correct. I'm just giving you another option that you might consider taking if you find yourself in a position where you're finding a screenwriting class or your ability to finish a screenplay being held back. And that, after all, is why we practice writing. That, after all, is why we wanted to be writers, is to convey a message. But I hate to say it, if you create a message like the tree that falls in the proverbial forest, and if no one hears it, does it make a sound? I'm going to say it doesn't. So the only way that your tree falling in the forest of creativity can make a sound is if you finish it.